Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome, Commissioner. Welcome to your team. Mark Carney's ethics screen that you set up lists 103 companies, almost all of which are Brookfield companies. The chief operating officer of Brookfield, Justin Bieber, told this committee that Brookfield owns 2,000 companies and businesses. Do you have a full and comprehensive list of all of Brookfield's companies and businesses?
We have a list of what the Prime Minister and his lawyers furnished us, and it is attached at Annex A to the screen.
So you do not have a full list of the 2,000 Brookfield companies?
No.
Okay. So Mark Carney holds stock options and deferred share units in Brookfield, potentially worth tens of millions of dollars. The chief operating officer of Brookfield said that in respect of Carney's stock options and deferred share units, quote, as the value of Brookfield increases, the value of those instruments increase. So accordingly, it follows that as Brookfield-owned companies do well, Brookfield does well, and by extension, Mark Carney does well. So if you don't have a full list of the companies, I would put it to you that you are missing potentially a whole long list of conflicts of interest or potential conflicts of interest that Mr. Carney has with Brookfield companies.
The Annex A to the screen lists the first five companies. This is really the ones who own all sorts of other, the rest of them, directly, indirectly, or in which are dealing with those. It's clear that Mr. Carney's compensation is tied to future compensation is tied to the success of Brookfield. But in order to avoid that he makes decisions which can be seen to benefit Brookfield and thereby indirectly himself, he has set up, first of all, he's put everything in a blind trust, but secondly, he set up the screen to make sure that any decisions that he makes regarding the five key holding companies, he is or the ones that he knows about.
Commissioner, I think you said it exactly right, that Mr. Carney's portfolio is tied to Brookfield. As Brookfield does well, so does Mark Carney, and yet 95% of Brookfield companies are not subject to the screen. How do you explain that?
I don't know where you get these 95. What you have before you is his statement saying these are the companies that he knows about, and he, etc. And then the entities that appear before the lobbyists, and also the entities that were defined by our office, etc. That's essentially the universe we know about, and as he himself says in Annex A in Item C, that I had no role in managing them and no direct financial interest in them. So now you're saying he has a financial interest. I don't know how you are you contradicting the statement made in Annex A?
I'm simply referencing what Mr. Bieber said, and in light of the fact that Mr. Carney has stock options and deferred share units, and I know that we saw a letter from Brookfield today that merely dismisses these companies as de minimis. Are you just taking Mark Carney and Brookfield at their word, or have you sought to get further information? Given Mr. Bieber's testimony that there are these 1,900 other companies, are you going to go back to Mr. Carney and go back to Brookfield and say, provide us with a list of those companies to determine whether or not additional companies should be added to the screen?
Lynn, do you want to answer that?
So, essentially, when the screen is a preventative measure, it's there to anticipate conflicts of interest. It's not there for the Prime Minister to avoid a conflict of interest. So, for all intents and purposes, if a matter is brought to the Prime Minister's attention, and the Prime Minister is aware that it would further the private interests of Brookfield, then he would have to recuse, even if the screen did not capture that item because it's not on the
I understand
annex.
how the screen works. Yeah. I'm just asking why will you undertake, or are you intending to get a list of those companies in light of Mr. Bieber's testimony? That was my question.
Okay.
Well, of course, we looked at these companies and to make sure we know what's the interest of, and most of them, as Mr. Bieber said, are de minimis.
Right.
But any kind of deferred compensation that you
Or taking
Thank you.
Brookfield at their word.
I'm going to have to cut it off there.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Commissioner, when you appeared before the committee in September, you stated that you wanted to avoid a situation where Mr. Carney would be making a decision knowing that it would increase the value of one of the companies that he has divested from, and that is why the screen was implemented. The Clerk of the Privy Council and Chief of Staff will verify whether any decisions would have an impact on any particular company. If the decision is of general application, then the Prime Minister would not need to recuse himself. When I looked into the tool used for this screen, I noticed that there are shortcomings in the application made by Mr. Sabia and Blanchard. For example, with C-15, for the budget bill that was tabled in the fall, tax credits were added that did not exist for small nuclear installations, and there was another tax credit for clean energy that includes those nuclear facilities. In the tool, it is stated that you need to be aware of Westinghouse, and that was at page 3 of the tool. They stated that they hadn't applied the screen because it was a decision of general application. But when we look at the definition on page 5 in that document, it states, if the decision has to do with an indeterminate group of people or companies, well, then it is a matter of general application. There are only 5 players for these small nuclear installations. On page 6, it states that if it applies to a large category, if the decision applies to a small group, well, the matter does not apply to a vast category. And yet they did not apply this screen. Should Mr. Carney have recused himself from the vote on C-15? One moment. Mr. Thériault, can you lower your boom mic a little bit, please? That's great. Thank you. Who would like to respond to the question? Michael? For what I've understood of that tax credit, it's for taxpayers. I had listened to the testimony by Mr. Sabia, and so it would be of general application for those nuclear plants. Well, he's wrong. There was a tax credit that was created for these small nuclear power plants and a new tax credit for clean energy, which did not previously include these power plants before. So we're not talking about a small indeterminate group here. It is, in fact, quite determinate. There are 5 players with Brookfield and Westinghouse. There are only 5 companies, yes, who can. In Canada or in the world? In the world, in fact. There are American companies, there are companies everywhere. I could name them if you'd like, but I believe that the screen should have been applied to Mr. Carney at that time because there's a direct link with his blind trust. The screen is applied to ensure that he does not make decisions that have an impact on his assets. This is a budget bill, so should he not have recused himself from the vote on C-15? You have made reference to many things regarding the nuclear industry and these small nuclear plants. I won't be able to respond right now, but you can write the question to me and I would give you a response. The interpreter regrets, but both people are speaking at the same time. For the interpreters, please do not speak over each other. You have 10 seconds left, Mr. Thériault. Well, how is it that if they're constantly communicating with you, how is it that they didn't verify with you in this specific case whether or not Mr. Carney should have recused himself? How could they have decided the way they did, given the ability that they have to ask for your advice? Thank you. Can I respond? If it's a very brief response, that would be fine. Because we have a lot of questions and we don't have a lot of time. Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes. Thank you for being with us today. 2 weeks ago, there were some big announcements made in Alberta on 5 topics that I would like to raise today. Carbon capture. Were you consulted? Was the screen used? The consultations are confidential. And so we could not have been consulted on the content. So regardless, we can't know whether or not you were consulted. So we have to base ourselves on the word of Mr. Blanchard and Mr. Sabia regarding the application of the screen. They are responsible for it. They can ask for our advice, and we give our advice, and whether or not they accept that advice is up to them, and sharing that is also up to them. So these are direct employees of the Prime Minister, and they are the only ones who can say to the public whether or not the screen was activated and whether or not they consulted you, because you as an external party are not able to disclose that information. Correct. Well, then how can Canadians trust a screen that is being managed by the direct subordinates of the Prime Minister? Because for Alberta, all of these decisions, Brookfield is there. Same thing for AI and data centers. Nuclear, Brookfield. Pipelines, Brookfield yet again. So Canadians can say, what's going on? And this leads me to my next question. The Prime Minister's direct company is involved, and we can't know whether or not they use the screen? You are focusing on the screen. It is a preventive tool. The Prime Minister must recuse himself. Let me finish. The Prime Minister needs to recuse himself if there is a conflict of interest. In order to help with that, we created the screen, and it is managed by Mr. Blanchard and Sabia. And so they ensure that the Prime Minister does not end up in a conflict of interest. And in order to do that, they can consult me, and I give advice. But you understand that our committee needs to ensure that the mechanisms are in place to protect Canadians. And we've heard here that Mr. Carney could manage things himself, that he is ethical beyond a doubt, but Canadians want to ensure that there is some transparency and a counterweight there, and that the only people who can prevent this conflict are 2 people who are directly linked to the person who is subject to this conflict of interest. So how can we decide that the current structure is sufficient if we don't even know when the Prime Minister was asked to recuse himself? Mr. Sabia and Mr. Blanchard need to prevent a conflict of interest. That's what their job is, to protect the Prime Minister and to ensure that there isn't a conflict of interest. But you don't trust them. I don't see why not. Because they're direct subordinates of the person who is in a potential conflict of interest. You stated that they need to protect the Prime Minister. Well, their job is to support the Prime Minister to ensure that there isn't a conflict of interest. Well, you use the word protect. But moving into my next question, we talk about general application. And it's a fine line right now. The head of Brookfield stated that when Brookfield increases its profits, so does the Prime Minister. So how do we know if the decision was influenced by a potential private increase? How do we know when that line has been crossed? In 30 seconds or less, please. The Prime Minister makes a decision of general application for Canada's well-being. Well, that's fine. If he does something that only benefits himself, then it's not okay. How do we decide if it's of general application or not? Well, currently there's no way to know. We don't know. That's what you're saying. Thank you, Mr. Hart.